2 months to go, and the presidential race is heating up. Europe sees a worrying spike in COVID cases, and free Netflix, no subscription necessary. Here's what you need to know. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for Tuesday, September 1st. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. It's September, Carlo. I cannot believe it.
Do you remember? I know, isn't it? Wow. It's this. You know what today is, Jill? Today is this year is 2/3 over. We made it 2/3 of the way through this miserable year. That also, of course, means that we still have 1/3 to go, right? And I have a feeling it's going to be a wild last third, just based on the election. Also, Jill, I'm sorry. I know that we're going all over the place this morning already, but I did want to mention a really quick update on a story we did yesterday about the change fees. United dropping change fees. Delta and American both out this morning announcing they are also dropping change fees. So we were just talking about how these things are going to start to these new flexibilities with travel are going to come out, and it's already happening. Just interesting to see.
Well, I guess about time. I never understood a $200 fee to change a ticket, unless it was literally 2 seconds before you were about to get on the flight. But cool.
We'll never have to deal with that again. Let's hope.
That's exactly. You never know. All right, let's get straight into some politics because this race, as we mentioned in the cold open, really starting to heat up. A week to go until Labor Day. The presidential race has entered a new phase with Joe Biden and President Trump trading sharp attacks over the last 24 hours over the violence in cities like Portland and Kenosha. So Joe Biden forcefully addressing President Trump's claim that America wouldn't be safe with Biden as president, saying in a speech from Pittsburgh that Trump, quote, can't stop the violence because for years he has fomented it. Biden condemning the violence and riots in various cities, calling it, quote, lawlessness, pure and simple, and saying that those who engaged in it should be prosecuted. The strongest, I think, language that we've heard from Biden yet here, Carlo.
I was watching him yesterday. I was like, he must have listened to our podcast yesterday and heard Jill say that, he hasn't come out forcefully enough because he did. And he explicitly in that speech, he condemned looting, rioting, violent mobs, as you said. And then the Trump campaign immediately put out a statement that says, quote, as predicted, Joe Biden failed to condemn looting, riots, and the violent mobs. I don't know. How are you supposed to respond to that if you're the Biden campaign? Or how are you supposed to cover that if you're the media, right? That's beyond sort of the usual sort of tit for tat or spin that comes out of campaigns. It's just like they're operating in a different reality on the Republican side. We in the media, I think, have a very tough job these next couple months in covering this campaign fairly, while also, pointing out that I hate to say it, but the Trump campaign is just not operating in good faith, at least when it comes to this issue, in my opinion.
So Biden also trying to flip the script on Trump, calling on him to denounce any violence perpetrated by Trump supporters. At a press conference, the president was given the chance to do that with regard to Kyle Rittenhouse. That's the alleged 17-year-old shooter in Kenosha. But instead, the president defended him, saying that it looked like he was acting in self-defense. The bottom line here, Carlo, is that Biden is now, it seems to be, fighting back against this Trump argument that he's this radical socialist. Biden saying, look at me, you know me, you think that I'm a radical socialist. Do I look like a radical socialist? You know my record.
It was really, I thought, as sort of like a political science nerd, it was actually really interesting to see that, because there's this rule in politics. It's sort of like this famous experiment known as don't think of an elephant, created by this guy George Lakoff, who's a political consultant. The idea being that if you say the thing that your opponent is saying about you, even in the negative, it still reinforces that idea, right? So like the famous example of that is Richard Nixon saying, "I am not a crook." It just makes people think like, oh, is he actually a crook? So Biden did this
Right.
yesterday, and I just thought that that was interesting because the sort of like the general rule of thumb is you're not supposed to say things like, do I look like a radical socialist? Because then people could be like, maybe he does. But
You know what? You kind of
right.
do.
But I mean, I think that it was, that was a strategic thing that he did, and I think that it may work because again, it's really hard to look at that guy and be like, he is some puppet of the left. He's he's just so old and not that, right?
I mean, and he was also pointing out, I think something that we've talked about is that this is happening now and Trump's in charge. So it's hard. I mean, I've never seen, could operate on, you can run on the message of change, you can run on the message of make America great again. But when you're in charge and this is happening, how do you run on an argument that you're the person to get it under control? It's happening under your watch, and
Yeah.
Biden seemed to talk about that. So the president traveling to Kenosha, Wisconsin today, where police say now the majority of people arrested following the Jacob Blake shooting, like Rittenhouse, came from out of town. Which is really interesting. In Portland, police are reportedly investigating a man who called himself an Antifa supporter on social media. They're looking at him in connection with the killing of a right-wing protester.
Yeah, that statistic from the Kenosha police is, I thought, really notable. So 175 people were arrested in that city in the last 2 weeks. 102 of those arrests were people who came from outside Kenosha, including, like you said, Kyle Rittenhouse, who came across state lines. Look, I mean, I don't, without sort of like respect to the specifics of like what happened with Rittenhouse and that incident or others. These are people who came looking for trouble, right? And in the case of Kyle Rittenhouse, they found it. I mean, I don't know what else to say about that. Yeah, the president has been running on this line that like people are coming, from the cities to the suburbs to kill you or to harm your family. But it's actually, I mean, not to be too cynical, but it's like the opposite is kind of happening, right? At least in the case of Kenosha.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a bad situation. Okay, let's switch gears here. Talk coronavirus. Cases now flat in 26 states, falling in 15, but they are rising in a handful of Midwestern states like Iowa, Kansas, Minnesota, and the Dakotas. The most pronounced spikes are coming from college towns like Lawrence, Kansas, and Iowa City, where the per capita cases are now among the highest in the world. Here in the Northeast, meanwhile, New Jersey is going to be reopening indoor dining and theaters on Friday, both at 25% capacity. Movie theaters can have as many as 150 attendees.
That struck me as a little high, right? 150
I
people in
would
the movie
assume
theater
people have to
seems,
wear masks.
I think so, but I don't know. That still seems like way too many people to be in an indoor setting for 2 hours. But also, Jill, I wanted to mention Europe. Cases are now back on the rise overseas across the pond, most notably in Spain, where the virus is now spreading faster in that country than it is in the United States as of today. 53,000 new cases in Spain in the last week. Also some upticks in Eastern Europe, Germany, Italy, and Greece, some of these places that saw the original wave back earlier this year. Spain is actually pretty notable because they had, remember, they had that really draconian lockdown back in March and April where people were basically just like not even allowed to go outside. And then, that obviously helped. But then they did kind of what we did here, and they just opened everything back up, right? In bars, restaurants, clubs, and now they're seeing the second wave. It's like, I hate we repeat ourselves here, but like we know how this thing spreads, and we know what to do to keep the spread down, right?
Yeah. And we're just at so many months. It's like we all didn't do it right in the beginning. And I guess we're just now, we're so many months into it. There is a fatigue. Even I don't know if you feel this, Carlo, but just, I mean, I was in the office yesterday and it was like, wearing my mask, then wiping down the anchor desk, and then not
Yeah.
touching a surface and using a tissue to open the door to the bathroom and the refrigerator. And then on my way home, I stopped and I got some food. And it's just like, it's exhausting. It
It
is
totally
just
is.
exhausting.
And I think, Jill,
Um,
the thing that
and
scares me about it is, and I don't want to be so dour on this beautiful September morning here, but the cold weather, the winter is coming, as they say in your favorite show, right? Like, and it's gonna, imagine how you feel now, but you're also bundling up to go outside, and cases are on the rise again, and you can't even go outside for a drink or anything to eat. I don't want to go there because it's too early. We're still technically in the summer, but it is on my mind.
Yeah, I mean, and back to just the idea of what's going on in New Jersey. We'll see what that does with cases. But a lot of the restaurants in New York City are saying we need a plan to open. Because in
Yeah,
terms of indoor dining, realizing that it's about to get cold, and the mayor seemed to signal that indoor dining might not be allowed until there's a vaccine
the
next
governor.
year. So what is that? Sorry about that. Yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
was it the governor who said that? But so
I
I mean,
believe so.
that's
Yeah.
the question of like what is going to happen? What is that going to mean for these restaurants once outdoor dining, once it's too cold to dine outside?
Yeah.
What happens to these places that make up the fabric of so many neighborhoods? Jumping back to politics, I do want to mention a Senate primary that is today. A Kennedy is on the ballot in Massachusetts and could actually lose. So Democrats in the state are choosing between Senator Ed Markey and Congressman Joe Kennedy, who is running to unseat Markey in the only serious Senate primary challenge of 2020. Kennedy is the grandson of RFK and the great nephew of JFK. But that has not made him a lock in the Kennedy's home state. He's trailing Markey in most polls.
He could become the first member of that dynasty to lose a race in Massachusetts, which we will probably know this time tomorrow. It's a fascinating race if you haven't been paying attention, which you probably wouldn't be unless you lived there. But just very briefly on this, it's super nasty, like no holds barred. They are going after each other. Markey is sort of like a proto Bernie Sanders. He's been around forever. He was a congressman forever, and then he's been a senator for like the last 7 or 8 years. Super progressive. And I think that Kennedy sort of thought that he was going to be able to, he's sort of like more of an establishment Democrat. He thought he was going to sort of be able to trade on his name to take this seat, but it isn't working. And he's sort of facing this big backlash. He's been losing the messaging wars to Markey on social media and on TV. And it's not just young people. Older, wealthy, white Democrats are breaking for Markey, which is really crazy when you think about like, at least my parents' generation, and Jill, I'm sure yours too, and like sort of like the cachet that the Kennedy name holds. We'll see what happens. Maybe he pulls it off, but there will definitely be sort of some lessons to be learned from this race, regardless.
Well, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the progressives are endorsing, as you're mentioning, Markey. So perhaps that's getting him a lot of support here. And
Sure.
going viral the day before this election is a Kennedy campaign ad that misspells the city of I don't even know how you say it.
Worcester. Worcester.
Worcester. Okay,
Yeah.
so in the ad, it spells the city with an H. I guess you could just say it's not a great look, right? It's a
No,
big
I
city
mean,
in the
come on,
state.
man. Yeah. You can't be misspelling. You can't be running to be the senator of a state and misspelling city names on your ads. Joe, we're definitely going to get our Massachusetts listeners writing in and making fun of you for mispronouncing Worcester.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, so it's where is that's what it is? Worcester,
It's
Worcester,
Worcester is how they call it. I don't know why,
Worcester.
I only
Okay,
know
I
this
apologize.
because I only know this because my roommate in college was from Boston, and he used to call it Worcester.
When I was a reporter, really quickly, I was at CBS Money Watch for a long time, and I was on the floor of the stock exchange, and I used to do hits for affiliate stations across the country. And I have a New York accent, so I would say, I remember the first time I did Nevada, and they just ripped into me. They're like, "It's Nevada, Nevada." Oregon, I would say Oregon, and it was like,
Oregon,
"No, it is
yeah,
Oregon." So I've heard all this
Oregon's yeah.
before, but bring it
Or
on. I
Jill's used
I
to it.
guess it's pretty
Yeah.
fair. Um, I do, I do want to switch gears on that note about money watch and whatnot. Let's talk for a minute about what's happening in the stock market. Big tech continues to be on an absolute tear. Shares of Tesla and Apple both closed at records on their first day of their new stock splits. So Apple did a 4-for-1 split, Tesla did a 5-for-1 split, which essentially gives investors that many more shares for each share that they own. And it's also a way for these red hot stocks to be more accessible to everyday investors, retail investors as they're called, and day traders, many of whom immediately piled in given how high these stocks spiked after their split. So basically it makes it a little bit less expensive if you're a retail investor and you want to own some Apple or Tesla.
Exactly. Yeah. Meanwhile, did you see Zoom earnings last night?
Crazy.
That company's quarterly sales jumped 355% in the last quarter. They already blew past expectations, which were already high. The video conferencing company made more money in May, June, and July than they did in all of 2019. That stock is up 25% after hours. Jill, I think if I could go back in time to this time last year, one of the things I would do is probably buy Zoom stock, right? I'd buy masks and Zoom stock.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And the stock market's in an expectations game, and it's incredible that the expectations were pretty high. It's not like people thought this company was going to do
Exactly. Yeah.
poorly in the last quarter, and they just crushed it. Meanwhile, Netflix opening up a chunk of its vast catalog to anyone who wants to watch, whether or not they're paying Netflix subscribers. That is huge news. The streaming giant has made some of its original content, like Stranger Things, Bird Box, and Elite, available for free. Movies can be watched in their entirety, but only the first episode of some of these shows is going to be free.
That's how they
Very
get you
interesting.
there. That's
Tricky,
how they
tricky,
get you,
Carlo.
right? Because once you watch the first show, you got to keep going. Yeah, this is pretty interesting. Netflix. We've talked about this, Jill. They're facing all of this increased competition from Disney Plus, from HBO Max, all these new streaming platforms, and they've seen slower subscriber growth. At this point, who doesn't have access to a Netflix account? I actually looked into this last night because I was like, are there people in this country who want Netflix but don't have it? I mean, 73 million households in the United States have a Netflix account. That's obviously, households, so even more people, given that, I mean, at least in my family, like 10 of us, share one account. But I think, overseas, I think this is a play for overseas, viewers too, because you'll be able to just sort of click to netflix.com, watch some Stranger Things if you're in like, India or Italy or whatever, and then maybe you sign up.
It's a pretty smart move.
They're smart.
Yes, no one ever said they weren't. Look, they famously have said that their biggest competitor is sleep. And now they say TikTok is a
Yeah,
competitor, right? Basically anything that competes for people's time.
totally.
Okay, and what I was up watching very late last night was the US Open. So Coco Gauff was eliminated in the first night of action at the US Open. Naomi Osaka won in 3 sets. She actually entered the court wearing a mask that had the name of Breonna Taylor written on it. On the men's side, number 1, Novak Djokovic cruised into the second round with straight set wins. And Steve Johnson, who's an American, he beat his close friend John Isner last night. That was a match that I was up watching.
Did you watch Coco?
And I didn't. I didn't, and
I think she was during the day.
so sad that I'm really sad that she lost because she's just an exciting player and just so sweet. So I was psyched
Yeah.
to see her this
Well,
year.
luckily, yeah, she's got a lot of a long way to go. I mean, she has like so much of her career ahead of her, so it's,
Totally.
I guess not. Yeah, but anyway, I watched a brief snippet, and it was the thing that stuck out to me because there's no fans there. If you've been to New York, you know that the Arthur Ashe Stadium, it's like next to the elevated subway line right there. So when I was watching, I was like, you could hear the subway train. It was just so bizarre because obviously, usually you would just hear the crowd noise. It's just another one of these sort of like weird things from this year. But also, I did want to mention this is the Andy Murray is playing tonight. This is the first tennis major to be played without Federer or Nadal since 1999. I learned that yesterday. Pretty incredible. Nadal's out.
I'm curious.
Federer's out with an
Wait,
injury.
so why didn't they? Okay.
Federer's injured, and Nadal, I think, has said he just wants to focus on the French Open, and he's basically like, it's just not worth it this year.
Right, and then a lot of them face I think if they go back home they're facing quarantines, so I
Right.
guess for some it is interesting. Serena Williams was interviewed and she said she doesn't even know how to feel about it all. I mean, she's playing, she's going to beat, like, the record, I think, of the most Grand Slams for any player, or the most, big wins for any. I'm not sure which record she's trying to break right now, but
Yeah.
she said, normally because the U.S. Open normally it falls towards the end of the tennis cycle, so their bodies are usually just a lot more beat up by this point.
Right.
So she's like, from a physical perspective, she feels great. She's a lot fresher than she would be after playing in other tournaments all summer. But she was saying it just feels weird, just this idea of going with no fans and um that's I can't wait to hear some of their interviews from after the matches, where they just talk about what the experience is like, because when you are the US Open is just it's a rowdy crowd for tennis.
Yeah, especially if you're somebody like Serena or Coco Gauff, like you're feeding off that crowd energy, right? That's what's bringing you. I think that's why, the sport. I mean, with the exception of basketball, I don't want to stay on this anymore, but with the exception of basketball, sports have been pretty bad, right? Like in terms of like the actual quality of play, and I guess maybe golf, but like in baseball, the baseball right now is just not good, and I think a lot of that has to do with there's nobody in the stands. I think crowds are really more important. One of the things we're going to learn this year is like crowds in arenas are more important than people thought they were. That's my hot take.
I think that's really I definitely with even college football, and I mean, I agree with you.
Right?
And it's nice to know we're important, Carlo.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
matter.
Not just to buy the
All right, let's
popcorn.
yeah, all right, let's leave it there. That's what you need to know for Tuesday, September 1st.
Okay, guys, see you tomorrow.